Thank you very much for coming today. For those who don't know me, I'm Amir Michael. I'm a professor of accounting at Durham University Business School. It's in the northeast of England. It's not Durham in the US, hopefully. The other thing as well, I play many roles there. So I'm the head of currently I'm the head of the accounting department, as well as the director of a joint venture with Rutgers, which is called the Durham Rutgers Accounting Analytics Network Lab, which is based in Durham for about 6 years now, where we start to work, have some joint project with Durham and Rutgers around some joint matters, especially on 2 matters, which is about healthcare analytics and as well ESG. So I'm trying to do just today goes run some background of the ESG agenda and give you an idea about the project. It's still in early stage, but just to give you an idea of what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve of this project. Fortunately, we recruited recently 2 PhD students, one from Korea and one from Indonesia, to work on this project. So they started already in September. So they start to do some data collection and stuff. So I'll just go through the background and give you an idea about the project. But of course, any feedback at this early stage of the project will be very welcomed. So the idea here is trying to look at 3 key things, which is, first of all, ESG reporting, so how organizations report ESG. And the other thing is around how as well the rating of the ESG, how they rate the ESG, and who will provide the assurance. So we look at these 3 things. So we're looking really about ESG assurance, ESG reporting, and ESG rating. So those are the 3 areas we're trying to assess and see how things work. So the idea here is simply to look at the environment audit activities as one of the important ESGs. But of course, as always, I'm discussing with makers, we say that E is easy, S and G is always important, but it's difficult to measure. So that's always a challenge we're going through. So it's like a journey. We're trying to look at physical appraisal. That's normally looking at pollution and satellites. That's more physical. Looking at system appraisals, and that's normally about the data and the information system internally to generate this information and as well to provide this level of assurance. And staff appraisal as well is crucial given the social element of the ESG agenda. And of course, assessing the future. So more about predictive modeling, about planning ESG activities, and how are we prepared for emergencies. And actually preparing for emergencies is very crucial because one of the interesting things we've tried to look at about activities that sometimes we say that organization going to be more green, like electric cars, and everyone say, oh, electric cars is more eco-friendly. However, if you look at we're just looking at the vehicle, how it's looking at the emissions, but you look at the full cycle from the start of producing the powder and the chemicals for the electric batteries until recycling the electric batteries themselves. There's a big question mark here. So for example, one of the big organizations or chemical factories who produce the powders and the chemicals for electric batteries based in Mannheim in Germany. And we visited that. And actually interesting when he took us on the tour, and I told him, okay, this site, you cannot have a tour into it. It's very dangerous. And we asked what the question about this site. It's the most dangerous chemical. What this chemical is the chemicals we use to produce the electric batteries. So it's very interesting. Okay, hold on. And they had the problem before because they're in a river and they need to put lots of precautions about water treatment in case there is any contingencies. So it's interesting. We look at the wider picture. There are some worrying issues here. So we looked at the reporting, a method of reporting. This is from the International Federation of Accountants. And what they're trying to do here is looking at the reports. We found that around 1,269 of 1,400 companies they examined reported ESG by way or another. They either reported that through sustainability reports, which is 57%, which is separate reports, or through annual reports, which means they integrated sustainability as part of their annual report, or through integrated reporting, which is 16%, or they don't report anything, which is 9%. So that's simply give an idea how organizations report ESG and how they communicate this kind of information. And then we looked at by jurisdiction and different countries and different interesting ideas. So one of the interesting things is France. We think that all France report the ESG as part of the annual reports. And there is a reason for that. We're going to see later. So in terms of reporting, there are a variety here. The orange area means they have a separate sustainability reporting. And you can see here, US is high on that. So you have sustainability, separate sustainability reporting. You have other countries, for example, you look at Germany, it's having a bit of a balanced model. You look at, for example, Saudi Arabia is more about a mixture. Looking at Australia, again, a balanced one. So it's varying from different countries. So different countries report ESG in a different format and are communicated in a different way, which is really crucial to understand. So we looked at the layer type, which is assurance. Who provide the assurance? Who are the organizations that can provide this level of assurance? Given that it's not part of the statutory audit. Statutory audit is very technical. It's very, very established. But when you look at assurance, it's totally different environment, totally different business. And one of the things here we can see that of the 704 distinct audit assurance report to provide assurance for only 645 out of the 704. That's provided by audit firms. So audit firms still play an important role, which is 58% of the assurance providers are the traditional audit firms. However, affiliated firms, 5%. What do I mean by affiliated firms? Some of the assurance firms have separate entities to provide this level of assurance, or other service provider, which is 37%. That's a striking figure for us, that they are new entrants to this market. So some organizations now are starting to look at providing this level of assurance as a core business for them. And that's very, very interesting, because here you can start to see there is a lot of business that can be made here. So lots of interest, not relevant to audit firms, not audit firms, but they do the business about this level of assurance. Interesting, we're trying to dig in and find who are these guys, who are the 37%. And I found some of them are consultancy firms. They're not relevant to audit firms. Some of them are just firms in relation to environment agencies and environmental procedures and environmental disclosure and for my environmental assurance services. So they provide less to think about environment, which is very interesting that we're not seeing things like predominantly as before with audit. Still auditing 58%, but still we have other entrants to the market to provide different level of assurance. And then we looked at the assurance standards cited here. Of course, the most obvious one is ISA 3000, which is the engagement standard, because it's very broad. I remember Jason was talking yesterday about the regulations and stuff, and we're looking at option 2, how the standards, and actually the reason they put ISA 3000 at 3410, because they're wide enough to include some levels of assurance and levels of engagement beyond the statutory audit. So that's what I was trying to say here. That seems to be that people are not going now asking for standard setters to come up with new set of standards, but what they're asking for, can we use the current standard in a different way? One of the other projects we're working on at the moment is what we call technology contextualization, which is simply looking at the standards, the IFRS and ISAs, and looking how which of these standards can be contextualized technologically. I mean by that, not even providing guidance, by saying these are the standards, but you can achieve these standards through those ways, through the traditional statutory way of doing it, or through some kind of engagement of assurance using technology. So here we looked at, these are the two standards. Other standards are still very early to tell, but the other standards, normally the ISA 3000 and 3400, which are more about related to this kind of assurance level. So what people would like to see about ESG assurance rating, which is the third element we're looking. So we look at reporting, looking at assurance, and looking at rating. And then rating is a big other project. So actually each one of them is a different project. So we split this big project into 3 elements or 3 areas. One of them is about ESG assurance reporting. One of them is about ESG assurance, and one of them about ESG rating. And interestingly, we start to borrow some of the theoretical foundation and some of the theoretical backgrounds used for credit rating and credit scoring in these projects and see how this is going to work. So people would like to see, for example, who are the best holding of investments? Where is your money going? Where is your, how is volatile in 5 years and thus more predictive model? What's the performance? As well as they would like to look at some exclusions. So some organizations, for example, they don't invest in fossil fuel. Some organization would like to avoid investing in organizations which use weapons or using children in terms of the industry. So they're talking about clean energy. So some investors are having interest in this level of information because that will dictate what type of investment they're going to make. So interestingly here, there's a lot of benefit about whether we talk about ESG assurance, ESG reporting, or ESG rating. So this is like a very very quick summary for how we do the reporting. So the sustainability reporting, whether a separate report, integrated reporting, or as part of the financial reporting. Of course, or FASB or IFRS, the two contexts are always easy to deal with the financial reporting. That's the tradition, that's what they understand. Integrated reporting started to be a bit problematic, it's more wider, and the wider umbrella is the sustainability reporting. So you can see here it's more about the scope. So financial reporting, we think is a minimal scope because you still have limits. You have scope for normal traditional annual reports. You have wider scope if you include it in an integrated report, and wider report if you include it as a separate sustainability report. And of course, in every one of them, you can see here start from the 17 UN goals, which is the 17 SDGs, Sustainability Development Goals. Now we're here looking at the GRI, and actually we are consulting. So one of my colleagues in Durham, Carol Adams, she's the chair, currently she's the chair of the International Standards for Sustainability in the GRI. So she's an advocate, and she's championing the idea of every organization need to have a sustainability report. Integrated report is smaller of a scope, and then smaller of a scope the traditional reporting. So in terms of reporting, they need to go moving around, and the European Union trying to move them up through the EU Directive for Sustainability, but they're not always successful in that. And interesting is not give. I mean, normally we'd like to see, okay, what's the theoretical foundation or what the theoretical background for this type of research? Normally, when we're trying to work on any project, we need to have a theoretical foundation. So in 2019, I published a paper with one of my colleagues called Rob Dixon, where we're trying to look at the public, what the public expectations are, and we look at the unregulated disclosure, including environment, social, government, HR, and many other factors. So we decided that in terms of regulated or unregulated disclosure, you have two types of reporting and two types of assurance. One of them, you have the mandatory regulated disclosure, which is the normal information like the typical financial statement, footnotes, additional schedules. And then you have the audited disclosure, which is the normal statutory audit. And then you have different types of disclosures, which are what we call the voluntary unregulated disclosure, which is that's including the ESG into it, like relation to environment, government, social, information about risk. So the lots of information which unregulated and voluntarily disclosed by organizations. So we included that separately. And then we looked at unaudited disclosure. And this is normally about what we call providing additional assurance services and whether there is any value to the public on that. So we looked at 8 categories. So we had like a bit of a taxonomy about 8 categories. So you're looking at general information, market, risk management, financial, HR, R&D, environment, social, ethical, and governance. So it's including, of course, the ESG, but not specifically saying these are the ESG. It's embedded with other factors which are more widely than just ESG. It's more about the voluntary disclosures. Okay. So the model we're trying to work around is published already. It's a very wide model. We looked at 3 theories to implement here. We looked at the agency theory, which is the conflict between the wider stakeholders, including the stakeholder theory and the directors. And this is the normal traditional model. What we're introducing here is the red area, where if you look at the index and we're providing what we call additional assurance service, we're looking here at something not called reasonable, not assurance, but we called absolute assurance. And absolute assurance means we are not using sample, we don't use materiality level, but using full population, full data sets. So that's normally implementing some big data analytics, and that's where the idea coming of unregulated disclosure and assurance. And of course, the unregulated disclosure assurance, we call it the UFDA, where it's trying to get many, many types of information, but as well is to look at anomalies, patterns, statistical regression, significant fluctuation, risk areas, and external and internal audit. And to provide this kind of information, we're looking at the balance between the structured data, which is disclosed by the organization, and other external information. When we done this project, we didn't know where we're going to go next. We're just trying to explore what the market is looking like. We're trying to see what the audit firms, and we've done this analysis. We asked all the big audit firms in the UK, and we asked other bankers, other academics, other public stakeholders like brokers, and see what the difference is and what they think about this idea. And this is just the index. It's available in the paper, but this is like the number of variables. We looked at these variables, and we're trying to ask auditors and the public about each of these items of the statements. So just, I'll go through them very quickly. This is a paper, of course, Nicholas published recently about the satellite imaging, and it's one of the areas. It's not everything, so it was good starting point. So the idea of the project was coming from these two ideas. From the paper we published 2019 about the wider unregulated disclosure assurance, plus some of the areas about using satellite imaging and other information. So what the proposal we're coming with is that we looked as well over the pandemic. So under the pandemic, this is some of the things from the news that satellite images show massive reduction in air pollution over Paris, Madrid, and Milan, following lockdown measures to slow the spread of the deadly COVID in Europe. And actually, it was like when you're doing an experiment, you're always looking at an experimental group or a test group and a control group. So if you look at the pandemic, it's like a control group where nobody's there. So you find the lowest level of pollution at the time. So that was very interesting that, yeah, satellites can pick some of the pollutions here. But we looked as well at something we have in the UK called the air quality measures, and that's give you the air quality measure every day and sometimes on hourly basis. So this is a measure in the UK. UK is is having something called the Environment Agency. They provide what we call Air UK. Air UK is a measure where they look at different types of components of pollution like carbon dioxide, monoxide, methane, other types of energy as part of the wider agenda for the UK for net zero. And it's trying to measure that on a daily basis and for any area. So simply what you do, you print the area, you print the day, and it gives you immediately what's the level of pollution in this area. Of course, they use some satellite imaging, but they use as well environment agency to some kind of sensors and some kind of random imaging and something else called random inspections. So this is the model we're trying to introduce here, which is having 3 areas of analysis. And we're trying to have a case study recently before I came to the conference, which I'll show you how it works, is looking at the financial statements. So still, we don't want to ignore the fact that financial statements still play a vital role. So that's our suggested model based on all these theoretical framework and foundations. ESG investment. So we'd like to look at ESG investment in the financial statement. And this is around the area which is about greenwash. Because the problem is, I can stand here and say, we are eco-friendly, we care about the people, we care about the environment. Who told you that's correct? So interesting, we find some examples that organizations saying, oh yeah, we're brilliant on environment, and they're not having even investment into pollution filters or water treatment in their financial statement. So everything needs to be translated into money you spend or invest into these areas. We haven't found the investment. So how come you're saying you are really caring about the environment, you care about the social, you're volunteering, and your financial statement is not having anything in relation to that? So that's the first element we're looking at. We look at the Sustainability Disclosure Index, similar to the disclosure we just discussed, which we published in 2019. So looking at the sustainable reporting for that and using some text mining and some NLPs in order to understand more about the text and the trend and the sentiments in the sustainability reporting about this area. And we look at the external independent measures like air quality measure, court proceedings as well. Some organizations like VW or BP, British Petroleum, we're having some court proceedings, again, breaching some of the environment matters like pollution and water, oil spillage. And we're trying to look at these things, satellites, which again, but always the news and the social media feeds. All these are external information can give you, like you have a trend of breach of getting children to work on one of the plans of one big organization in Africa. So how that's gonna work? So newsfeed, social feed. The interesting here is you can see that all these types of information are not all numbers, are not all structured. It's a balance between structured and unstructured, quantitative and qualitative, including text. So how we can get a model around that. So trying to look at the case. So we got here a case around what we call the 3D or the 3-dimensional ESG. And this is a case for British Petroleum. We're at a very early stage, but we're trying first of all to pilot on a couple of oil and gas organizations to see how things, so we're dipping dive in these organizations, see how these things work. So looked at their financial statements, which have, we're getting here financial statements here, as you can see. This is the sustainability report. They have a very rich sustainability report. And of course, talking about the different level of, it's not clear here, does not talk about the methane, reducing the methane, carbon dioxide, and so on. And then here, this is realized by the government, which is the Environment Agency in the UK, where they provide the level, okay, you can put like a square. This is most of the operations of this company, which is in the North Sea, north of Scotland. So they have lots of ideas. So you can get the air quality there and measure it against the parameter they have in the air quality and tell how much the quality, and that's on a daily basis. So we can take an average of the every day and feed that into. So we mix the picture for the 3 of them. When you plotted that on our model, it's simply, you have here the statement, you have the sustainability, and you have the external sources. Of course, you can have the social media, the satellite imaging as well, and that's how we mix them together. So simply what we're trying to do with this project is a proposed dashboard, which is trying to have all the 3 areas together and how they measure. So we're using that as an example. And we are as well The next project, I've left the team working on it. We're working on the same case on Aramco at the moment in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Again, lots of information there is happening about sustainability and things, but how we mix this information together, that's why we're working. So there's some synchronization modeling we're doing at the moment around this area. So this is simply the model we're trying to work about ESG, how we can merge these things together. They not been merged, how we model them together and integrate them in what we call the 3D. We call it 3D or three-dimensional because it looks at one dimension, which is the statements. The second dimension is the Sustainability Disclosure Index, which we created in 2019, and as well the air pollution or other external sources. So we call it the 3D dimension. It's just a provisional name for the time. How to do that in training? Very quickly, we are producing a program recently called Master in Accounting, Analytics, and Sustainability to train people how to use these things. And to make sure, of course, we have conversation with Nicholas and Rutgers, possibly they'll be engaged on this program, which people can be trained. I mean, the red areas is about the analytics courses, and the purple ones are the sustainability courses, where we merge them together. We're trying to marry the two together. So you don't do sustainability and analytics. And actually, interestingly, this has been through approval in Durham University. One of the interesting questions came to me. Oh yeah, I think that might have potential to be two programs. I told them, no, it's one program, because that's the mistake. We don't want to have them separate. We need to marry them together because there are lots of integration. And of course, we normally, when we do things, we'd like to train people how to use it. So this program is an online program. Anyone can take it, anyone in the world. They can take some modules or courses. They can take a certificate. They can take a diploma. So technically, it's a 5 sub-programs under one umbrella of one program. So these are some of the references of the papers we used on this